It's Monday, April 14th. I'm Adam Walsh, and this is The Signal. Looking for a psychological assessment in Newfoundland and Labrador? Be prepared to wait. That's the headline to a recent article by my CBC colleague, Jenna Head. On today's show, we dig into that, and we talk about the ins and outs of getting a diagnosis, along with some resources. All right, so folks, phone lines are open today. What was the wait time for your psychological assessment, or if it's one of your kids or someone in your family orbit? Did you go the private route? Are you still waiting? Do you have an experience to talk to us about? 709-722-7111, 1-800-563-8255. You can text us, 709-327-8206. Emails, thesignal@cbc.ca. I'll remind you about those numbers through the show. Jenna Head is here. Welcome back to The Signal. How you doing?
Hi, Adam. I'm good. How are you?
Good. Thanks for coming back on the show. So this was back in March. Looking for a psychological assessment in NL. Be prepared to wait. Demand is growing for ADHD and autism assessments. NL Health Services says that's the headline for your work. But whenever I have a reporter like yourself, and I always like to hear kind of the backstory around the reporting, because I think it's important for us to talk about how we do the work we do. So where did this idea come from, and how did you dig into it?
Well, so one thing I like to do every now and then is I take to Facebook and ask people, what would you like us to talk about? And, kind of put your thumb on the pulse of what's happening in the community. And I took to the parents' Facebook group, actually, Parents Helping Parents, and it came up that a lot of folks are waiting a long time to get psychological evaluations of any kind, and that includes kids, that includes the parents themselves. So I looked into it. I sent a note to NL Health Services, and they came back and said that for adults, wait times can range from 18 months to 5 years, and then for children, wait times range between 12 to 27 months, but there's not, just because there's a wait time doesn't always mean there's a wait list.
Right.
So getting that information kind of raised some red flags, and then, you just start reaching out to people and figuring out why.
So you start reaching out to folks, figuring out why, bunch of interviews that have been done, and then also like health services get back to you too, right? Or just around some of those dates and everything else, and you can file all that for your reporting.
Yeah. And so this is specifically for the public system. Of course, if you go private, you can get it done much faster. There was one woman I interviewed. Her name was Carlina Squires, and her option was wait 3 years if she went public, or pay $3,000. So she chose to pay $3,000 because it would then help her with work.
Yeah.
And that's the case a lot of these folks are into. And I mean, we did talk to Health Minister John Hagee. He told us actually that he doesn't think the wait times are accurate. And he said it would be unwise to speculate too much. And the problem is they have issues recruiting, physicians and psychologists and psychiatrists, that type of thing. But then at the same time, you have people who are waiting years.
Yeah, years, right? And we've got some tape of Carlina we're going to play in a little bit. And this is that conversation between, like you're laying out there, it's like, okay, there's the public route, and then for some folks there's the private one, but then it can depend on insurance and how much money folks have to be able to go down this path, right? So we're seeing some of these differences here. I want to... Well, here we'll go to the first guest, and like I said, the phone lines are open, folks. But we've got Florence Strang on the line, CEO of Mindful Matters and founder of Mindful Solutions, registered psychologist. Hi, Florence. How you doing?
Hi, I'm good, Adam. Thank you.
All right, tell us a bit more now about. Don't mind my intro for you. Tell us a bit more about yourself and your business.
Okay. Well, I'm a registered psychologist and owner of Mindful Matters and Mindful Solutions, which is the nonprofit sister company, we call it. And we incorporated in 2019. Right now, we have 12 psychologists who are primarily dedicated to doing assessments. And we have over 40 people on our team in total. So there's counseling, therapy, there are clinicians who help with assessments, occupational therapy, and other services that we offer.
How busy are you?
Very, extremely busy. I actually got my business manager, Pam, to look at some of our numbers recently, and we get approximately 100 referrals a month just for assessments, adults and kids.
100 referrals a month just for assessments. And so on top of that, what's all the other work that's being done?
Well, we do a lot of counseling as well.
Yeah. What does that say to you to get that many assessments in the run of a month?
That there is a big need out there, definitely, as Jenna indicated, and that people are eager to avoid the long wait times. And she kind of alluded to the fact that with kids, there is, well, from what parents have told me, it's anywhere from 2 to 3 years wait. For adults, I've talked to adults who've been on we don't even know if there is a list, again, as Jenna alluded to, but who've been waiting 5, 6 years or more. So then, compared to, sorry.
No, go ahead. Compared to, go ahead.
Our wait list, which is 4 to 8 weeks.
Right. So, there's the difference, right? 4 to 8 as opposed to it can be years. And Jenna mentioned the health minister or acting health minister being skeptical around wait times and lists. I'm not asking you to hit for your thoughts on what he said, but in your experience, what are your thoughts on the accuracy of the fact that folks are waiting for these, having to wait long periods of time?
Yeah, and I think from what I've heard, again, 2 to 3 years for children, and for adults, it's more than was indicated in that March 20th article from what people have told me. Yeah,
so from the folks coming into you, from your clients. What are the pros and cons for private, right? So there's the cost bit, and I know that in folks' head, whenever we talk about this, the question around, well, is this setting up two-tier healthcare is there? I was wondering if you could explain your thoughts around that as you see it.
Certainly. So there is a cost involved, and for ADHD assessments, generally we're talking around $2,000, and for autism, it's probably $3,000 to $3,500. So they are expensive because it is very expensive to run a private clinic. But I would say that 95% of people who come to us do have private insurance. So that covers, it could be anywhere from $500 to half to some 100% coverage. So we look at the concept that we're creating a two-tier system. So somebody who has good insurance or income can afford to go private where others can't. I would say I do not agree with that because it's a win-win. If you're looking at that, there's 1,200 children, I heard from a reliable source, 1,200 children on a wait list for the Janeway. And we're getting 100 a month referrals, and we're not the only private clinic in the province who are doing these assessments. So how long would that list be if there was not a private option? So those kids who do not have insurance or can't avail of the private, they're waiting a lot less because of the children not clogging up the system.
Yeah, it sounds like you're looking at the reality of what is happening and then where you fit within the reality of it.
Yes.
Is there any talk about the government paying private for some of these services, like in a non-insurance route, like an MCP type thing?
Yeah, not MCP so far, but for a short while, NL Health was paying private companies to do adult autism assessments, but that hasn't happened in, for me, a couple of years.
Do you think this would be a route for kids or adults to go to do more of this?
I think it would be a good option.
Okay. The other thing I wanted to ask you about is some of the work you're doing with Mindful Solutions in Labrador. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, sure. So Mindful Solutions is our nonprofit corporation. We started that in 2022, and it was in response to the fact that there were a lot of people who came in for assessments, especially with children, who couldn't afford it. So then we thought, is there a way that we can get funding or avail of funding or fundraise to help these families? So we have been doing that, and we got a grant of $30,000 from the TELUS Indigenous Community Fund. So that's particularly aimed to the Indigenous population, and they are funding 10 assessments. However, the Mindful Matters clinicians and psychologists have agreed to do those at a reduced rate. So now we've stretched to 10 to 15. However, we had over 150 applicants
Right.
for those.
So again, it just shows you the demand for this type of medical service.
Definitely, yes.
All right, Florence, I just want anything else before I let you go?
I just want to put in the idea of the early intervention. When
Sure.
you look at how long people are waiting, so we'll just take autism as an example. So we typically see the first signs of autism in children when they're about 2 years old. If children have to wait then 3 years to be assessed, they are already school-aged and in school before they're diagnosed. And then they're missing out on the important early intervention and the provincial autism services, which our province does provide to people for free. And I myself worked for 28 years as an educational psychologist in the system, in the school system. So I've seen the difference between the children who come into kindergarten who have had the interventions versus those who haven't. So it just really speaks clearly as to how important it is to have the early interventions.
Florence Strang, thanks so much for this.
Thank you.
All right, Florence Strang, they're CEO of Mindful Matters, founder of Mindful Solutions, registered psychologist. Let me go back to my main guest, Jenna Head, who's here. We're talking about Jenna's reporting. Just like anything stick out there from your reporting on what Florence was talking about? Because we'll move on to, there's some of that tape I want you to help set up as well in a second.
Yeah, so one thing I thought was interesting is the idea, getting the province to help fund some private assessments because, of course, like that would help alleviate some of the wait times. And when I interviewed Dr. Haggie, health minister, he said if we need to buy in expertise or skills to help with wait list, we've done it before, and I'm perfectly prepared to have those discussions with psychologists and psychiatrists. So it sounds like to me that it is something that they would consider. It's just that we don't know how active those conversations are at the moment.
Yeah, exactly, right. But it's because I saw that in the reporting, and then just from this conversation here, the thought is floating around out there. Mm-hmm. Tell us, so we're going to play some tape, and then we've got another guest. Dr. Janine Hubbard is waiting patiently as well here, and we'll bring Janine into the conversation. But remind us, you mentioned in the start of the show about Carlina Squire, so give us another reintroduction of Carlina.
Yes, so Carlina, she was 32 when she got diagnosed with ADHD, and on the topic of early intervention, that was something that wasn't even on her radar. It wasn't on her family's radar growing up. We've heard that women are better at masking. ADHD in women is drastically different than it is in men, and specifically young boys. So, it looks different throughout childhood. And what she thought were just, I'm a gifted kid. I do well in school. It turned out to be ADHD, a diagnosis she got later in life, especially when she, got into the workplace. But how she found out about her ADHD was interesting. She saw a bunch of symptoms on TikTok, which I'm not saying you should get your healthcare information from TikTok, but she saw these videos where it was giving symptoms of ADHD in women, and she kept seeing videos about like how it impacts behavior in women her age, and she's like, wait, I think I have that. So she went to her family doctor, went through all of the steps, and then pursued the private diagnosis, which she received. And now she's doing a lot better because of it, because she's properly, she said she's properly medicated now, and she's also has had like therapy and whatnot. So she is an adult who got diagnosed later in life, but it could have been earlier if that was on the radar. Yeah.
And it's about 5 minutes, and it's from Jenna's interview with Carlina. So what I did was I just kind of, it was about a big old long conversation, so I shrunk it down to get some interesting points here. So take a listen to this, and then we'll further dissect some of it, and with some ins and outs around ADHD and what you should know, and resources with Dr. Janine Hubbard. So take a listen.
Yeah, so when I started, it was about almost 3 years ago now is when I started to think about maybe I should get diagnosed. So I spoke with my doctor at the time, and I was told you could go through MCP, so you could go through the provincial way, but when I spoke to her about it, she said there was a really long wait list. And she said there is the option to go privately, but of course you have to pay out of pocket and rely on insurance. And I decided that if I was going to wait a long time, it would probably be best to go private because I wanted to have that diagnosis because working with ADHD isn't always easy. And so having a diagnosis means I can work with my doctor on potentially getting some medication or therapies. So the sooner I got diagnosed, the better. When I spoke with my doctor at the time, she said the wait could be upwards of 3 years, sometimes longer, sometimes less. You're never really sure once you're on that wait list. I do find there's a huge gap when it comes to mental health. And for example, like I didn't even know where to go to get a diagnosis. I had to ask on social media. I don't even know where to go if I want to get therapy for my ADHD. I had to ask on social media. And there's a severe lack in access to mental health here in the province. I wish all doctors would realize that women with ADHD, our symptoms are entirely different than men. Most of us get diagnosed late because of that, because when I grew up, I was the good kid. I had the good grades. I was always a good studier, and I was always the one, top of my game. And then I hit university and I crashed. And that is apparently a very common thing with people with ADHD because we're actually never taught how to actually study. We're taught how to put the information into our brain and keep it there, but the actual studying aspect of it, somewhere between high school to university, gets completely lost. And so that's one major part. And then, we're not the kids sitting there bouncing our toes in elementary school and stuff. That kind of stuff doesn't really come till later. I found I was like fidgeting a lot more in my late 20s, early 30s versus as a kid. I wasn't the one, not listening, up running around, not paying attention. I was on probably sitting front row paying the most attention. And that gets a lot lost on a lot of people because they hear ADHD and they hear the attention deficit. And it's so much more than just that. So if I could wish like anything on healthcare and mental health care, especially in our province, it would be recognizing that there's so much more to ADHD than just on the surface. I remember failing an exam in like high school, and I remember crying my eyes out. And back then I thought, oh my God, I didn't study enough. It's all my fault. And again, that's where the RSD comes in. I completely rejected myself and told myself it was my fault, but it's not my fault. ADHD is literally a chemical imbalance in your brain, and it's not something you can control unless you're having therapy, unless you're taking medications. And sometimes too, even those medications, like you have to balance those out. You have to try, like I had to go through 3 different medications before I got onto the medication that I'm on now. And it's a trial and error thing, really. Like the first one made me so irritated and I couldn't sleep. The second one gave me leg cramps. And so like you have to find that balance in between. I work a lot with kids. I work with Girl Guides. I volunteer with Girl Guides. And so now having that diagnosis myself and knowing what I knew about myself, I see a lot more of it in kids as they're coming up through. And I've spoken like with their parents in the past. And I mean, I'm no doctor myself, but as somebody who had ADHD, I can relate to some of these kids coming up through, and with the hopes that, hopefully these kids can get diagnosed a lot sooner and help manage their symptoms a lot sooner than I did. And so when I actually got the diagnosis, because they kind of, with ADHD, it's kind of like 2 streams. There's one that is on like hyperactivity, and then there's one that's more so like on forgetting things and so on. And when I was told that I was extreme on both levels, my mom looked at me and she said, oh, I guess that does make a lot more sense now. And like I talked over my diagnosis with her, and she even, as part of my diagnosis, had to fill out a little questionnaire on like, have you noticed this before? How does she cope with this? How does she react to this? And ever since I got my diagnosis, my mom has been the most supportive. She completely is my rock when it comes to, making sure that I get things done. Like if I've I keep a calendar on my wall, so like sometimes she'll take a peek and then she'll be like, oh, you have an appointment at 11 o'clock tomorrow. So she's been very, very helpful with that.
All right, so Carolina Squires there, diagnosed with ADHD in her early 30s. I'm here with my CBC colleague, Jenna Head. Dr. Janine Hubbard is also here, clinical psychologist. Hi, welcome back to the show.
Hi, thanks for having me.
All right, so we were just listening to Carolina there, right, who went through Mindful Matters for diagnosis. What are some of the... Where do we jump off to for this chat, Janine? Like around... Jenna mentioned TikTok earlier, so can we start there, please?
Sure. I think it's important to put in context a couple of things. One is that our knowledge and our understanding of ADHD and autism, both diagnoses, continues to expand and grow. ADHD in particular in really exponential ways. I was saying I'm old, but I'm not that old. When I went to grad school, we thought that kids outgrew ADHD, and we didn't worry about what it looked like in adults unless it was, the most extreme cases, and obviously we have learned differently from that. But a couple of things. So we have kind of a missed couple of generations, particularly of women who weren't picked up during that time period. And certainly with the lockdowns and COVID, we saw a few things. We saw people whose routines suddenly got disrupted, and they didn't realize a lot of the external scaffolding or supports that maybe they had by going into work, or just the additional demands of trying to cope with kids and homeschooling, and also trying to, keep up with life and household and everything else. So we saw a real surge in interest in either with the kids going, oh, now I see what the teacher was talking about, or with adults saying, I was doing okay, but maybe I was really only treading water and now I'm really struggling. And yes, the TikTok phenomena has been really interesting because what we've seen is absolutely some great information get out there. Unfortunately, what we call differential diagnosis, trying to figure out if a diagnosis is present, especially in something like ADHD, where it's a lot of behavioral symptoms, it's a lot of observation and self-report. TikTok can become a bit like a horoscope, because if you just read down through the symptom list, most people will go, well, yeah, sure, everybody does that every once in a while, without understanding either the intensity or the duration or the daily functioning impact that perhaps some of those symptoms have on an individual. In fact, there was just a really recent survey that came out, the 100 top ADHD TikTok videos, 50% of them had inaccuracies in them. So
that's not a good percentage.
That's not a good percentage. And you know what? I did it. I'm not on TikTok, but I looked it up, and like literally the number one that came up, I was like, oh, those top 10 facts, none of those are actually accurate, or it's sort of right, but it's missing a lot of nuance. So we're going to make sure you get some reputable information and sites. But I do think it's helping people to at least kind of start to explore and become a little bit more self-aware. And we can talk a little bit about some of the research that's coming out, why it is so important to seek out a diagnosis if that's something that you are legitimately, curious about and concerned, because we're finding all kinds of secondary health issues and a lot of the impact on daily living that goes so much further than, a hyperactive little boy in grade 1 having trouble staying in his seat.
You're listening to The Signal. I'm Adam Walsh. The lines are open, folks. We're asking today, what was your wait time for a psychological assessment? Did you go the private route? Are you still waiting? Do you have an experience to talk to us about? The numbers to call are 709-722-7111, 1-800-563-8255. Let's go to the phones right now. We've got Kay Snow on line, co-host of the Alter Minds podcast, a podcast about neurodiversity, and my colleague Jenna Head's going to handle that side of it.
All right.
Hi, Kay. How you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
Good. So, Kay, you did an amazing interview with us when this story first came out, and we wanted to bring you back because I understand that you were diagnosed with ASD a bit later in life.
Yeah, I was diagnosed 2 years ago.
And you gave this statement to us that was really interesting to me. You said that you went through the private system, but you're still on that public wait list. Do you know if you're still on that list?
Yeah, as far as I know, I'm still on it. It's been 3 years.
Yeah, and how do you feel about that? I mean, how quick was your diagnosis when you went public?
Well, when I went private, it was right away. Well, not right away, but I got in within a couple months, and the process only took a couple sessions.
Yeah, so we're talking about, it's a diagnosis that can come within a couple of months and a couple of sessions versus ongoing 3 years. And was it something that came was it on your radar?
Yes, because I have a degree in neuropsychology, so it was on my radar. I got a lot of information from actually autistic people, too. Like, there's a website called Neuroclastic that's run by actually autistic people, and it's really useful. And then there's also a website called Embrace Autism, which is run by an autistic doctor who does assessments. So they put out information about different assessments that you can do, but also the research behind them.
Mm-hmm. And you mentioned as well that, it's different in women than it is in men.
Yes, there's different traits, right? Because women are socialized to be quieter, be meek, tend to be seen and not heard or raised that way anyway.
And you guys have the Alter Minds podcast. Tell me a little bit about that.
We do a podcast on neurodiversity, so we just found that it was lacking. We wanted a local perspective for Newfoundland and Labrador only to get people information about neurodiversity and the supports that are available locally.
Mm-hmm. And wait times, of course, we talked about it before. They're between 18 months to 5 years for adults and 12 to 27 months for children. Now, that comes from the Health Authority. We heard earlier that it's definitely longer. Is that a surprise for you?
No, because I don't think that we have the psychologist or the psychiatrist to be able to diagnose the amount of people that we have waiting.
And Kay, I guess tell me about some of the misconceptions that there are with getting diagnosed with something like ASD or ADHD later in life.
Well, a lot of people think that you can't have or you grow out of ADHD and autism, but you don't. So that's misconception number one. But also, there's definitely a lot of stigma and stereotypes around autism specifically. Mm-hmm. So a lot of professionals still don't think that autistic people can be verbal. Mm-hmm. So we usually see a lot of non-speakers and things like that, or like the kid that is flapping their hands. It's a very stereotypical view of autism. I'd like for people to actually meet more autistic people so that they could see that we're all so different.
Mm-hmm. And an interesting one I think you brought up when we did our initial interview was, you have a family, and that is something people are sometimes surprised of.
Yes, people have been shocked that I have a child and that I was married. I was like, well, we can have kids and live pretty normal, healthy lives.
Mm-hmm. So if you were to if somebody was, kind of questioning, so we're thinking about the listeners here now, they might think, I'm showing some symptoms of ASD or autism, maybe I should seek an assessment. What is something you would tell them?
Well, you don't need you can self-identify as autistic, ADHD in the community and be completely accepted. So you can get supports and resources from the community without needing a diagnosis. But the diagnosis is necessary for any government supports, I suppose.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. All right. So, Kate, thank you for that.
Yeah, okay, thanks. So, one more question. Before I let you go, I was just wondering, last question from us. When you started the podcast, right, the Alter Minds podcast, what's the response been like from the autistic community since you've started these episodes?
We haven't had much of a response, honestly, not yet anyway.
So just keep working away on it, hey?
Just keep working away, yeah. I know that some people are getting a lot out of it because it's the first time that they felt validated.
Yeah, and that's awfully important.
Yeah.
All right, Kay, thanks so much.
Thank you.
In case you know, they're host Alter Minds, a podcast about neurodiversity. You're listening to my CBC colleague Jenna Head doing the interview there. We've got Dr. Janine Hubbard here as well. Dr. Hubbard, any thoughts on what you were hearing from Kay there?
Oh, I think discussing things like the stigma and the misunderstanding that still unfortunately persists around a lot of neurodiversity diagnoses. Again, whether it's understanding, well, literally the word spectrum is in autism spectrum disorder. It covers a really wide continuum. And kind of like ADHD, the more severe cases, yes, have always kind of historically been picked up, but it's the much higher functioning. I heard from both of your guests in the commentary in terms of how you might be able to mask and ways that you can put yourself in a classroom so that you don't necessarily stand out. My favorite example there was I had a little girl who would immediately leap up as soon as the teacher was ready to hand out papers and say, "Oh, miss, I'll help you with that." She got praised for that, right? And she got her movement break, and she got that little, need met in a way that the stereotypical little boy would get up or move around or do something, but without permission and without it being in that kind of very pro-social way, which you can appreciate why things get missed.
Folks, this is The Signal. If you would like to join the conversation, what was the wait time for your psychological assessment? Did you go the private route? Are you still waiting? Do you have an experience you want to tell us about? 709-722-7111. 1-800-563-8255. You can text us, 709-327-8206. The Signal at cbc.ca. Here's a note we got. I understand you're doing a show today on psychological assessment wait times. I wanted to add there's a very long wait list for OT and speech for any clinical intervention once diagnosed. I understand the wait list for public services are about 2 years long. I'm unable to call in today, but wanted to provide feedback. I commend you for bringing this issue forward. Keep up the good work. So that's from a regular listener on the show. So again, we're talking wait times, lots of conversations to be had around wait times in the province and in a time, I say there's a lot on the show, in a time of a health accord, so we're trying to march forward with things, but there we go. Janine, just to go back to you. All right. We were just listening to the last interview that we had there, right, with Kay. I just keep thinking on the stigma side of it. I keep thinking of, is it just me or is it like years of from movies to TV shows to media and everything else, and the stigma that was put out through the 80s and 90s perhaps has set us up for some very incorrect thinking around things?
Well, I think the issue is anytime you're trying to portray either what a psychologist does or what an individual with a particular condition has, you're also having to condense and really simplify things for the sake of entertainment. We were speaking recently, there's the Netflix series Adolescence, where, of course, the psychologists are all saying, that's not at all how we would do that kind of forensic assessment, but it has to be done in a dramatic way for that kind of drama. And I mean, we're starting to see some better understanding and some better focus, but I think there's still a long way to go. I was delighted we heard a little bit in terms of, again, some of those misperceptions. Just for example, with ADHD, it's actually not an inability to focus. It's a difficulty regulating focus. So it's difficulty putting the right amount of attention on the right thing at the right time, because that's when we also see things like hyperfocus, where if it's something of interest and or there's a really looming deadline, there's amazing work that can come out, and then people who don't understand, they get really frustrated going, well, why can't you produce like that every day? Without understanding kind of the exhaustion and the toll that can take on someone afterwards. Or if you haven't received the diagnosis, going, why is it some days I can produce this phenomenal work, and then the next day it's like pulling teeth? So really understanding that it's that, how do we regulate some of that focus?
We've got Molly on the line from St. John's. Hi, Molly.
Hi.
Hi. Thoughts on today's show? Comments? Questions?
Yeah, so I'm a speech-language pathologist, and I just want to kind of communicate the fact that the wait times are not reflective of the fact that there's no clinicians. So basically the government is refusing to add positions despite there being a surplus of unemployed speech-language pathologists. Like myself and two other girls who graduated about 4 years ago, we have been working for the Northwest Territories for the past 3 years remotely while living in Newfoundland.
What?
So,
Yeah.
sorry.
Yeah. So, like, you're available to work here, but not being hired, and there are wait times.
Yeah.
How do you? Has there been any communication as to why that is?
So it seems as though the government is just refusing to prioritize early intervention. There's been a lot of requests for more positions to be made. I know that at the Health Science and the Janeway, they've been continually advocating for more positions to be added. I think there's something like 10 speech pathologists on casual call-in, but they can't get permanent jobs. And then it's really frustrating for me because I'm working in private and I'm seeing all these families come to me and they have these really great needs and the public system is not able to meet that, and then their financial situation is really impacting their child's development.
Can you talk a little bit about those needs and what the impacts are on development for children?
Well, the biggest issue I see is delayed language. So if a child is not speaking by 2, a lot of the time they'll be referred to the Janeway. And I think the wait time for assessment right now is 12 months, and for intervention it's 24. So if you're referred at 2, you're not actually being seen until you're 4. So the implications of not treating a child until they're 4 is so great in the long run, because then they're about to start kindergarten and they're still not speaking. And a lot of the time we are dealing with autistic children. So early intervention is kind of key for long-term success, and the province is completely dropping the ball on providing that.
So then when you talk to your colleagues about this, like, what are those conversations like? Because it must be awfully frustrating.
No, we're all very frustrated.
Yeah.
And it's difficult because for those working in Eastern Health, there's not much opportunity to speak because they're kind of bound. Where I'm not employed by anyone, I can kind of speak freely. But it's really frustrating. I mean, we all did these degrees with the understanding that we were going to be able to come home and work. And the job opportunities across Canada are really, really great. But for those of us who want to be in Newfoundland, we're just dealing with unemployment, which makes no sense because we have some of the highest needs in the entire country.
So then for your future, are you going to just keep working remotely if a job doesn't pop up here, or is there a risk of this province losing a working professional like yourself?
Well, there's a lot that are being lost. Like, I know offhand of like 4 or 5 have had to move away. Some in the province are leaving the profession to work in other fields, like just general management positions within Eastern Health that have nothing to do with their specialty. So for me, I kind of need to stay here, so I'll keep working remotely and seeing private clients and trying to kind of hobble together a living like that. But it's very disheartening to see how the government is not listening to our concerns. I've been calling and emailing for the past 2 years, so.
And has there been any response to you from these calls and emails, like from any department? Yeah.
No. I've emailed all the ministers multiple times. Nothing from them. Paul Din, who's my MHA, he's reached out to me and put me in touch with Tony Wakeham, and we spoke briefly. But no response from anyone in the current government, and just kind of falling on deaf ears, it feels.
And what did Opposition Leader Wakeham tell you?
He said that we would discuss further, but that was in December and haven't really had much follow-up from that. But I was happy that he at least responded to me because no one else had given me the time of day.
Right, of course. Molly, thanks so much for this. I appreciate you calling and talking about this situation.
Yes, no problem. Thanks so much.
All right. So Molly calling there from St. John's. If you want to add your voice to this conversation around wait times, right? We're talking about psychological assessments. Did you go the private route? Are you still waiting? Do you have an experience to tell us about? The numbers to call, 709-722-7111, 1-800-563-8255. Today's show, we're digging into a news story by my colleague Jenna Head, right? And that one was looking for a psychological assessment in NL. Be prepared to wait. So Jenna's still here with me. So, we just heard from Molly there. I'm just curious, your reporting on this. Oftentimes, we do a story, but then another story comes. Like, are you continuing the reporting line around this topic?
Yeah, so I'm hoping to do another article about the children wait times specifically because, I mean, we talked about early intervention and the importance of that. And of course, we're seeing behavioral issues in school. So it all kind of ties in. When one area is strained, it affects everything. And beyond that, I mean, we're looking to do follow-ups on what is the actual wait time if Haggy says they're not accurate. And also, I will follow up with Molly. I just asked our AP for the phone number because I think that's certainly a story. We're seeing, I mean, people want to work, right? These physicians, they want to work, and people also want to be helped. So it's just kind of reporting on the bit of red tape that's there, I think.
Yeah, take a look at what folks are saying, what some of the frustrations are, what obstacles may or may not be there, what the way forward is, because as that health accord ticks along, and as we talk in a year of three elections here at each level, it's looking at where some of these gaps are, and that's where the reporting comes into it, of course.
Yeah, and also like today, for instance, I was looking at a report that we will be doing some reporting on, and even in the hospitals, like, mental health cases beyond just like ADHD and ASD and all those things, they're seeing more cases of that. So there is more a demand for treatment. And so it's just, mental health is a wide, area to report on.
There's a lot.
But there will be many stories that will come out of this, even if they don't directly relate to a psychological assessment wait time.
Yeah.
There are things that come out of it,
Yeah, on the health beat, on the mental health beat, on all of
things.
that. We got an email for which I think Dr. Janine Hubbard can help us with. It says, "Hi, Adam," and I know I can't answer this, so this is where you come into it. Can school psychologists diagnose ADHD? Can we talk about some of these tools for getting a diagnosis?
Sure. And again, it varies a little bit from province to province. I should also say the headline that Jenna created for the article could apply to every province in this country at the moment in terms of shortage of psychologists, in terms of access to psychologists. And also, and if we have time, maybe we can delve into a little bit why, a thorough assessment is time consuming. And, in order to do it properly, it's not just a half hour and some questionnaires. What I will say is the role of school psychology is evolving at the moment. So I don't want to speak specifically for my colleagues there.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Because some of that has been what the schools were traditionally able to offer versus the skill set of some of their psychologists. So I know there's some work there within psychology, trying to make sure that their employer allows them to work to full scope of practice.
Yeah. So folks, if you get that question, bring it to the school psychologist, and they should be able to tell you. Let's dig into what you were just talking about there.
Sure. So I think one of the biggest misunderstandings around a lot of this is, well, can't you just do a couple of questionnaires and look at some report cards, or talk to somebody's mom? Why are these things so expensive if you're going privately? Why are the waiting lists so long? Because in many cases, this isn't something where, we can give a blood test for, or what we're looking for are behavioral observations, objective and subjective measures, and in particular, what we call differential diagnosis, because there are so many things out there that can make someone look inattentive or make them look like perhaps they have ADHD or they have ASD. And it's teasing out, okay, yes, absolutely, you're having trouble with inattention. Is that because of trauma history? Is that because of anxiety or OCD? Is that because of depression? Is that because you're in a household where there's a lot of chaos and there isn't a regular sleep routine? Is it a substance use issue? Is it a language disorder? Because we also know that a lot of these conditions can co-occur, and so teasing out what's happening to cause someone to feel like they are inattentive, and also being able to document, well, where are the areas where they're struggling either with the inattention or the impulsivity or perhaps some of the social interactions, like where, because that looks different for every individual, which is also why both there's stigma and misunderstanding, but also why diagnosis is challenging, because no two individuals with ASD or ADHD look alike.
That sounds like a lot to try to figure out. Like it would take a lot of time.
It's detective work. It's why I love it. It's a whole lot of fun because it's putting together all the different pieces of the puzzle. And when you can put that puzzle together, I'll tell you as a psychologist, wow, is it satisfying. But it's funny, with our trainees, they talk about doing feedback and how terrifying it is. And I tell them that's actually my favorite part of the assessment process now, because it's answering a question and it's helping guide someone in terms of next steps. The other thing that I think is really important for people to be aware of is the heritability of these conditions. These neurodevelopmental conditions run in families. ADHD in particular, if I'm diagnosing a child, the next question is, okay, which one of the parents does this resemble? And what are we going to do in terms of next steps for you?
And I guess there's been a lot of work lately because of everything you laid out earlier in the show about what was missed in the 80s and 90s with young folks then who are now the parents. And if you get the child being diagnosed, it's almost kind of like, well, let's reverse back. And then perhaps we're seeing some new diagnosis here around on the parent side when the kid gets diagnosed first, is it? Or like reversing it?
Yeah, absolutely. And then you have the what ifs and the, how could my life have looked different?
This must be a lot.
It's a lot to process. And I mean, we've alluded to it a little bit, but that it's not just a diagnosis and medication, that it's wraparound services. It's things like speech language pathologists, it's like OTs, it's counseling, it's physio, it's all kinds of additional supports that often go hand in hand. And that regret or that how could life have looked different with a late diagnosis is often a lot for people to process.
Remind us where folks should look again if they're curious.
Okay. Number one recommendation I can give is a website called CADDAC, CADDAC.ca. It's Canadian, it's reputable, it's not TikTok, but they have free or low-cost resources, webinars, one of the best descriptions I've seen in terms of how the medications work, but they also offer things like parent groups or support groups, or they were doing like a teen executive functioning program. And amazing, for a group based in Toronto, they offer things in multiple time zones. So they even try to cater to those of us, on either coast. So CADDAC.ca would be the number one place that I would recommend people go. And you don't have to have a diagnosis yet if it's something you're curious about or wondering about. The other place I like to send people, and it's easiest just to Google it, is CADDRA, CADDRA. That's the organization that gives guidance and guidelines for healthcare professionals. But if you Google the CADDRA adult questionnaires, it will give you some free printable questionnaires that you can complete. You can have a significant other complete, and you can start the discussion with a primary healthcare physician if you have one.
What if I'm on TikTok later today, which I won't be, but if I am, and I'm just like, the ADHD stuff, I'm like, oh, God, maybe that's, and I self-diagnose, and then I start taking, what's the danger around this? Or if I'm a kid, it doesn't have to be me specifically, a 45-year-old man, but if for folks out there.
I'll give the example. So I'm 22.
Yeah.
And my TikTok.
You're 22?
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
I am on TikTok and I use it all the time. Yeah. And there was a while there where I was getting a lot of ADHD videos where it was like, if you're a young algorithm. Yeah, it was like if you're a young woman, and you do XYZ, you might have ADHD. And so for myself, I mean, I'm not diagnosed with ADHD. That's not to say I don't have it. I don't know. But I was seeing all these videos, so I can see how people would look at TikTok, and because of the frequency what you're seeing it, you kind of self-diagnose in that way. And you're like, maybe I do have it. I do all that.
Well, and we also have it's been a really interesting pendulum as someone who is a lot older than 22. Sorry, Adam and I both just died a little there. That we've seen the pendulum fully swing in terms of young people seeking out diagnoses in some cases because they want to connect with either an online community or sometimes it's a favorite star or celebrity or an influencer, somebody that they admire talks about a condition. And it's almost happening as a form of self-identity. And on one level, okay, that's, but we want to make sure that people are getting accurate information because we do know there's evidence-based treatments that are out there that you want to make sure you're accessing. Now, there's some things that are out there that are just great for anybody and kind of universal supports and a lot of universal things that can be really helpful. But I've also seen sometimes where people have really entrenched a self-diagnosis and again, part of a diagnosis, the diagnostic process is if someone comes in and they're not presenting with what they thought was happening, it's my job to then really help them understand why I didn't make the diagnosis while still validating here are areas of struggle in your life and here are some things we can do about them. But very specifically, either it's actually something else causing those symptoms or, you know what? Yes, you're having these, but normalizing that some of this is stuff that, we all experience.
We got a couple other emails coming in. Please ask which professionals can diagnose ADHD. And I know there's probably a range, and like you already alluded to, it could be layered depending on the person and their background and also who they work for.
Yeah,
right?
Really excellent questions. Historically, it's been psychologists and physicians. So that could be a general physician, that could be a psychiatrist, that could be a pediatrician. We have some areas where they're expanding scope, so we are now seeing nurse practitioners. And we are seeing some other individuals in the community branching out. What I always suggest is, and I believe it's Kadra that also has some good questions, anytime you're talking to a professional, because not all psychologists treat ADHD or diagnose ADHD, same thing with physicians. So you want to make sure you're finding someone who has a lot of experience and expertise and training in the field. So finding out, well, what kind of training did you receive? How long have you been doing this? What do you do, both in terms of looking at ADHD symptoms, but also the differential diagnosis? What do you do to make sure that it's being ruled out? And then the last one that I think is really important, and we're seeing a bit of a shift coming up. So something like ADHD can potentially be eligible for the disability tax credit.
Right.
Well, you want to make sure that the practitioner making a diagnosis is eligible to complete that form. Same thing for post-secondary supports. You want to make sure that the person who is giving you a diagnosis, their diagnostic credentials are acceptable by the post-secondary institutions.
Listen to this note. Do I have enough time to read it? I do, I think. Hi, just wanted to chime in as a parent of a child with ADHD. We were, quote, lucky that our son showed the very classic signs of ADHD, inability to sit still or focus at a young age. We waited for an assessment through the school system for a year and a half before finding out that his name has somehow not even been put on the list. However, another stroke of luck, he had another health issue with his and his pediatrician noticed his inability to sit still during his appointment and asked about it. We then got him diagnosed pretty quickly. It took a few months to get his medication just right, but wow, what a difference. Not just his ability to focus, but his emotional regulation and his ability to deal with frustration is 1,000,000 times better. He's, and here's all caps, happier. I just want it. Sometimes I feel like Casey Kasem when I read things like this, but I just wanted to share how important it is to get our kids and ourselves assessed as early as possible because intervention can be so helpful. We will be getting my husband assessed soon, and we'll be doing it privately. Our insurance only covers $600 a year, so it will be mostly out of pocket, but better than waiting several years. Thanks for the great show, and thank you so much for that email. Dr. Hubbard, thoughts on that?
Oh, I have goosebumps.
Yeah.
But that's the reaction that I get when I do that feedback. It is life-altering. The best analogy I can give, especially in the adult world, is if you've ever seen those videos of little babies getting glasses or cochlear implants and being able to see hear for the first time. And there is this, oh my goodness, is this how the rest of the world has been functioning? Yeah. It can be life-altering. We don't have time today, but like I say, we've got new research coming out looking at long-term health implications, financial implications, educational implications. There are an awful lot of additional consequences that can come with having undiagnosed or not properly supported and treatment for things like ADHD. And I'm hoping we're going to be able to follow up on some of that.
I think we can. And just to underline and underscore that email again to finish today, because I don't get to, like, he's, all caps, happier, right? So anyways, folks, I'm going to, Jenna, thanks.
No
Dr.
problem.
Hubbard, thank you so much. That's it for the show, folks. Thank you. Monday's done. If you want to get in touch with us, you can email us, thesignal@cbc.ca. You can text us 709-327-8206. Call and leave a message on the Signal line, 709-576-5260. Thanks for listening, folks. We will do it all again tomorrow. Cheers.